The Black Dahlia murder is almost a template for the sensational unsolved homicide story. A young woman is found murdered in Los Angeles. The details are horrific. The press turns it into a national obsession. And then, despite a massive investigation, no one is convicted. The victim was Elizabeth Short, 22 years old. Her killing is usually dated to around January 14th or 15th, 1947. And the discovery that locked the case into history happened on January 15th, 1947. Her body was found in a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue in Los Angeles, often specified as S. Norton Avenue between West 39th Street and Coliseum Street. What made the case explode in public attention, immediately and permanently, was the condition of the body as described in major summaries. Elizabeth Short had been severed into two pieces, and many accounts emphasize that she was drained of blood and posed. Retrospective coverage also frequently notes the facial mutilation often described as the Glasgow smile, and that the body appeared washed or cleaned. Even for people who don't know much about the case, those details are usually what they remember, because the crime scene seemed staged for shock. The autopsy was performed the next day, January 16, 1947, by Los Angeles County Coroner Frederick Nabar. In secondary summaries, the bisection is often described as being done with a surgical technique, sometimes labeled a hemicorporectomy. And the discussion around the injuries has long fueled one of the case's most persistent ideas, that whoever did this may have medical knowledge, or at least the ability to cut with unusual precision. That belief wasn't just a pop culture assumption. In overviews of the investigation, it's noted that the LAPD pursued leads connected to medical training, including looking into medical students, with FBI summaries referencing that USC medical students were checked as part of the investigative effort. It's one of the earliest examples of the case's pattern. A plausible investigative angle emerges. It sounds like it could be the key, and then it doesn't produce an arrest that holds. The timeline leading up to the murder is also a huge part of the mystery, and also a huge part of the misinformation problem. A widely repeated last known sighting places Short at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles on January 9th, after a trip with Robert Red Manley, who is frequently described as dropping her off. But later myth-busting reporting has treated the Biltmore angle as contested, pointing to how easily unverified sightings hardened into facts once newspapers printed them. That uncertainty feeds into one of the most enduring open questions. Where was Elizabeth Short in the days between January 9th and January 15th, the so-called missing week? Both Wikipedia-style summaries and retrospective reporting emphasize that her whereabouts in those last days remain unclear, and that many reported sightings were either ruled out or judged to be mistaken identity. In other words, even before you get to who killed her, you hit the problem of what exactly happened right before she died. The police response was enormous. The LAPD conducted an extensive investigation, and common summaries state that more than 150 suspects were considered over time. And yet, the headline never changed. No arrests, no conviction, and the case remains unsolved. Another reason the Black Dahlia case became legend is that it didn't stay confined to a single crime scene. There were communications that pulled the press directly into the story. Retellings describe phone contact and letters, including messages associated with the press receiving Dahlia's belongings, and later communications where someone claimed the name Black Dahlia Avenger. The FBI's own archived story about the case notes that FBI records included requests to match fingerprints found on an anonymous letter allegedly from the killer, along with the frustrating detail that those prints weren't found in FBI records. The FBI's role shows why this case has remained so popular. It's a famous case with official material people can point to. One FBI summary highlights how quickly Elizabeth Short was identified through fingerprint comparison, reported as taking 56 minutes using blurred prints sent via sound photo. And the FBI's archive materials also promote the existence of a vault-style file containing things like clippings, descriptions, and citizen letters, reflecting how the case sprawled into a national obsession that generated paperwork as well as rumors. But the press didn't just report on the case, it shaped it. Major retrospectives describe tabloids' behavior that crossed lines, fabrications, altered imagery, and even deception of Elizabeth Short's mother in the scramble for a scoop. In that environment, trial by headline didn't just happen to a suspect, it happened to the victim's identity. A long-running theme in Black Dahlia coverage is that the public was fed a version of Elizabeth Short that blurred into noir stereotype, and that this still affects how people interpret the case. Even the nickname is debated. Black Dahlia is widely associated with the press and with the 1946 film titled The Blue Dahlia, and FBI summaries describe the name as something the press applied. But other research, like Larry Harnish's catalog of common myths, argues the nickname originated at a Long Beach drugstore and then spread, illustrating the larger point. With this case, even the background details are contested. And then there are the suspects, an endless list with no final answer. Over the years, people have repeatedly tried to solve the case by naming one definitive culprit, and one of the most prominent modern claims centers on George Hodel. Steve Hodel, George's son and a former homicide detective, has publicly accused his father. Reporting notes that George Hodel appeared among key suspects in surviving documentation. And later summaries also repeat a widely quoted wiretap-related line attributed to investigative notes. But crucially, none of this resulted in formal charges or a courtroom resolution. And the broader suspect discourse remains crowded with unreliable confessions and disputed reconstructions. That's why the Black Dahlia murder still functions like cultural gravity. It pulls in theories about medical skills, serial killers, and even possible links to other mutilation cases, an angle strong enough that it was once framed in connection with the Cleveland area torso slayings in an Unsolved Mysteries segment. At the same time, the case is also framed as Los Angeles' premier myth noir, inspiring books, films, tours, and major fiction, most famously through writers who treated the unsolved nature of it as part of the story itself. The Black Dahlia is a case where the date and name are widely known, the imagery is unforgettable, and the case has an official investigative backbone. But it's also a cautionary example of how an unsolved case can become a legend, where documentation, lost evidence, press interference, and decades of repeated myths make it harder and harder to separate what's provable from what's simply been repeated the most. The Black Dahlia is a case that I've always been kind of interested in. I think part of it is the old Hollywood noir vibe, but I've never really found a version that works for me. I read The Black Dahlia by James Ellroy years ago, but it didn't really click. Looking back, I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. I also watched the 2006 movie with Josh Hartnett and Scarlett Johansson, and I just remember hating it, even though I don't remember why. If you have any better recommendations, let me know in the comments.